Hi, everyone, and welcome to Place in Practice. It's really lovely to have you all here with us today. I'm Susan Kukuchka, and I work here at Place as the Knowledge Management and Translation Lead. So I'd like to begin our time together by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands we're all joining from and recognizing their continuing connection to land, waters, and skies. And we acknowledge how much place-based work is grounded in country and shaped by the deep knowledge and leadership of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And I pay my deepest respects to elders past and present and extend that to First Nations people here with us today. And if you would like to join in this acknowledgement and share with us the lands that you're all on, then please, we welcome you to do so in the chat. So, as I said, welcome to Place in Practice, or as we like to call it, PIP here. It's a free monthly 1-hour online series for people working in place-based change across Australia. So it's hosted here by the Place team, and each session offers a deep dive into a featured place resource, as well as opportunities to connect with other change makers and share experiences from your practice. So this is very much a space for shared conversation, not just presentation. So as we go, please do feel free to share what you're seeing in your context. Come up with, any questions, reflections, or examples. It's all very much welcome, and you can do so in the chat function, or pop your little Zoom hand up, or come off mute, and the team here will keep our eyes peeled for anyone who wants to share. And at the same time, of course, we know it's lunchtime, you're eating your lunch, so please do participate in whatever way feels comfortable for you today. And just so you're all aware, we're recording today's session so that we can host that on our website for anyone who can't make it, or if you've got to leave early for whatever reason. So today's session, strengthening the place-based workforce, tools from Place and tips from practitioners, is a bit of a mouthful, but hopefully what it does do is provide us all with some really useful practical resources and insights into the key skills and competencies required to achieve impact and bring about change, in place-based work. So one of the things that we've been consistently hearing here at Place is that the place-based workforce and training landscape can be complex and hard to navigate, and that this makes it challenging for practitioners and organisations to know what training is relevant to their work and how they can access the right skills and capabilities building opportunities. So what we've been working here at Place is trying to bring more clarity to that by identifying the skills and capabilities that most frequently appear in place-based work, that are most important to place-based work, and then mapping those to all of the training across Australia that's available to grow those skills. So today we'll be hearing from Suji Upasena, who is our Workforce and Sector Strengthening Lead, Tchan, our Places Workforce Initiatives Coordinator, Tess, who is Places Director for Strategy and Governance, and Christine Kamau, Community Development Worker with AC Care and a member of Places Community Council. And this wonderful group of people will walk you through the skills framework we've developed and a really useful compass tool, which is designed to make it easier to explore the training landscape, as well as share some perspectives on how they navigate these skills and capability development and training in their own work and practice. And as I mentioned, we would love for you to share your experiences, your stories, your reflections throughout the session. You can join the conversation here or pop into the Slido questions that we're going to pop up as we go along. So I'd like to now hand over to Suji to take us through the skills for place-based change. Thank you, Suji.
Thank you so much, Susan, for that lovely, warm introduction. Hello, everyone, and it's so lovely to see some familiar faces and also some new ones. I'm really looking forward to getting to know all of you and giving you a platform, hopefully, to share some of your experiences and bring in your stories. So, as Susan said, this really is a space for learning and connection, and we would really like to activate that today. So, feel free to put your hand up or take yourself off mute at any time and join in the conversation. And remember, there's no such thing as a wrong answer. So, reflect, ask questions, and if something doesn't land with you well, let us know as well. We are very happy to have a chat about it. And Sam's very kindly put up the QR code for Slido. So we are going to start engaging with you right from the start. We weren't joking when we said this is an interactive session. So I encourage you to get onto Slido, and please keep your Slido handy because we will be engaging with you right throughout the session. Now, before we deep dive into skills for effective place-based work, I want to ask you a question. And that question is, name a skill that you use every day in your work. Awesome. It's popping up already. Fabulous. Data analysis, yes, no surprises there. Time management, we could all do with some extra time in the day. Communication is another one that keeps coming up. Yeah, that's a big one, isn't it? We all need that with whatever work we engage in. Strategic decision making, yes, that's really a good one as well. Sense making and negotiation. Systems thinking and change, yeah, we'll go a little bit into that when we talk about the skills. Listening, yeah, deep listening is a skill that we will talk about as well. Beautiful. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating. Creative thinking, yes, keep them coming while I go into the next little bit. So I want to give you a little bit of background in terms of where these skills that we've got here have come from. We've done some extensive desktop research, and we've also talked to people who are doing place-based work. And from this, we've come to understand that there is not one specific skill or competency that's key to being an effective place-based worker. Place-based work draws on a complex combination of capabilities that require people to constantly shift, learn, and adapt to changing contexts. You all know this, so this is nothing new, I'm sure. We see that practitioners work across interconnected issues, for example, housing, health, education, justice, just to name a few. And we see that a lot of you are shifting from program delivery to service or to systems change. So focusing on root causes, collaborating, and focusing on those long-term outcomes. Being flexible to take on different roles, learning continuously, having an open mind, embracing change. This is what we see repeatedly as what's required to achieve impact. And this complexity exists for a reason. Skills and capabilities in the place-based space need to do two things simultaneously, and that is respond to immediate community priorities and also influence the structures and systems that sit behind them. And that's a big ask. And we see that people doing this work are multitasking all the time. So to get us started, another little bit of info that I'd love to hear from you about is, what are some of the multiple hats that you're wearing right now in your context? And you can pop this in the chat. Or you can take yourself off mute and speak with me. Now, I can't see hands up from my screen, so I might need a little bit of help from a teammate to shout out and let me know if someone's got their hand up, or just take yourself off mute and jump in. Linda, finance management to compliance to sponsorship. Yes, that I'm not surprised. Again, that's a lot of very complex hats to be wearing. Anyone else? J, procurement, implementation, data monitoring, relationships. And Claire, you've got manager, marketing, and comms, HR, finance, management, and gardener. Oh, yeah, I love that. Joe, you've got funder, commissioner, facilitator, collaborator, and bringing your own lived experience leadership of the issue I work in, as well as being a team manager. Yeah, that's a lot to hold, isn't it? Belinda, administrator, coordinator, business advisor, data interpretation, and storytelling, information sharing. What do you mean by data interpretation? Do you want to elaborate a bit on that? That sounds intriguing. Fair enough, Belinda. It's hard to be multitasking.
I still can't spell.
But I'm assuming you meant interpretation. I understand people are multitasking right now, probably eating lunch while engaging. So I really, really appreciate you putting your comments in there. Thanks so much, everyone. We might move on. So just keeping on with the 6 skills for the moment. These skills, I'm sure, is nothing surprising. Exactly, Jane. Yes, a lot of people are managing finance within daily tasks. That's interesting to see for sure. That's a little trend we are seeing. In terms of the 6 key skills, I know that sometimes they may come across as sounding a bit corporate, but I just want to make it clear that it's not really as complicated. And I'd like to quickly take you through an example, if I may, just to bring this a little bit to life. And we will be talking to our guests as well later in the day, and they will bring this even more to life. So let's think of a situation where around youth unemployment, for example. So you might have noticed in your local town that youth unemployment is high. And what might be some signals? So, for example, you might see some young people loitering during working hours, or you might hear young people are getting themselves into trouble. And you kind of start to think, I wonder if there's something going on here that I can do something about. Now, you might be a youth worker, you might be a parent, or you might just be a local community member that wants to get involved. And just in that act of wanting to get involved, you're already exercising leadership. So, as you might have gathered by now, when we say leadership in a place-based context, we are not referring to a title, we're just referring to someone who's getting into that space, ready to get their hands dirty and get into the work. Like someone who mentioned they were also gardeners, one of the multiple hats they're wearing, literally getting their hands dirty. Now, once you've decided that you want to get involved, you might think, I don't know enough about youth unemployment. How do I find out a bit more? So you might do some research, you might look at ABS statistics, you might look at some articles, you might talk to some people in your local community, including councils and so on. In that act, you're already doing a little bit of data and evidence. And by engaging different people, you're doing a bit of stakeholder analysis. You're kind of scoping who could be interested, who could be involved. And if you decide to go and talk to the youth themselves as well, you're already starting that first step of co-design. And youth are obviously going to be a key stakeholder in all of this anyway. So as you can see, where I'm getting at is when you do something, you're already engaging in these skills. And when you're talking to people and you're listening and you're analyzing, you're kind of going on and, using these skills in a very natural way. Okay, so can I just ask you, Sam, we might do a Slido again. Which skill are you drawn to out of the 6 that are here? And if you want to come off mute while you're doing this, I'd love to know why that skill is something that's important to you. Deep listening. We also see data and evidence. Leadership, yeah. Co-design. Project and program management. Thanks, Belinda. Data and evidence, yes. Do you want to come off mute just to say why?
Why? It's because it's what I use a lot. I think there's a lot that can be. I don't think data is the holy grail. Data and evidence is the holy grail. But I work in the NDIS space, and they're moving to a data-based model. So they're asking people to provide evidence now as we move into the new space. So plans will. They're doing what they call functional assessments. They'll be moving into functional assessments for clients, and that will be evidence-based. So the clients will have to submit evidence of what they can and can't do. And so the question then becomes, is this the right step, or is it going to be quite restrictive? And there's a lot of questions about this at the moment because it's moving from a different. Previously, plans were based around their diagnosis. So what was their diagnosis, rather than what and now they're moving to what can they do and what can't they do. So towards capabilities and capacity, as opposed to diagnosis, which is both a good thing and a bad thing in some ways. A good thing because we're moving away from the medical model of disability, which is, I think, really, really important. But the onus is now going to be on the participant to prove that they need the services that they are eligible for, rather than having easy access to them. And there's a real concern that it's going to mean that a lot of people are going to lose the services that they are currently receiving, which are making a huge difference to their capacity and capabilities already. And so if they can't continue those services, are they going to go backwards physically and mentally and emotionally because they're not being provided because they're capable and don't really supposedly need them anymore? So that's the issue there.
Thank you, Belinda. That was very comprehensive, and it's really interesting to see how the NDIS is evolving over time with that focus on functional capacity and putting the responsibility back to the participant to provide that evidence. Thank you. That was very interesting. Kate, you've got project and program management because it's action focused. Yeah, that's a great one. And it's really interesting to see that lots of people are drawn to deep listening. Thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate your engagement. Okay, so we are going to, as I said, unpack this a bit more, but now we might just move on to the competencies. Now, the competencies are not separate from the skills. They are part of the skills. And we can think of these competencies as chunking the skills into more manageable learning components, let's say, for example. So, for example, if you look at something like tools and methods for place-based work, you will notice that that can be under a lot of different skills. So that's something, as you mentioned before, when you multitask in your roles, you could use that in leadership. And by tools, we mean things like theory of change, program logic. There can be a series of different tools. And tools and methods can also be useful in the data and evidence space. And so, as you would see from these competencies, a lot of this will overlap. And we are not expecting that everyone holds all these skills or competencies, but we are just hoping it will trigger you to reflect on it and think about what skills you already hold and what skills you might want to outsource or hire in or get from your networks and stakeholders and so on. The interesting thing that we just very briefly want to touch on here is that we see a trend that practitioners who we know from working in this space that a lot of us operate very much on intuition and continuously learning. But we are seeing a slight trend where practitioners feel that their work has outgrown that informal or instinctive approach and they're seeking stronger capability. And these are in specific areas. For example, systems thinking and facilitation is one area that we've heard of. Co-design and engagement is another one. Evaluation, measurement, and impact, for example, social return on investment or monitoring, evaluation, and learning is coming up as well. And lastly, we are seeing strategic planning and decision making. And I think one of you popped that up as a skill earlier on as well. So in this context, training is viewed as essential infrastructure to strengthen practice and not just an optional professional development thing. So what we did at Place to honor this and recognize is that we tried to map the training that's available to the skills and competencies that we had identified. We noticed that there is plenty of training out there, but it's a little bit difficult to navigate and it's quite overwhelming in terms of which course do I do? How long does it go for? How much does it cost? Is it online? Is it in person? Is it accredited? Is it non-accredited? There were so many questions. It was really hard in a short amount of time to quickly come to a conclusion in terms of what training might be most appropriate. And we looked at over 100 training programs. Now, we know that practitioners generally describe a disconnect between the depth of community-led work and the ability of funding, governance, and reporting systems to recognize and support it. And training is seen as a way to bridge this gap, enabling practitioners to translate community knowledge into forms that institutions understand. And again, I think I'm preaching to the converted. So as a response, Place put together a training directory. And I would like to very quickly show that to you. But before I do that, I just want to say that a dominant theme that emerged when we were doing this training mapping is the need to better measure and communicate impact, particularly where outcomes are relational, preventive, or cultural. So the skills framework can be a good starting point to do this. Okay, Sam, I'm just going to share my screen now, if that's okay. So just bear with me. We would love for the tech to work right now, and let's have a look. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see my screen. Just give me a thumbs up if it's good to go. Awesome, thank you guys. And so we are here on the placeaustralia.org website, and as you would notice here, there's an initiatives tab, and I'm going to hop into this one, which is the workforce training tab. And in here, you will see this infographic as well, but this is not what we're going to focus on right now. We're going to go into the Place training directory. So in this training directory, we have filters that you can use. And you can filter by training topics. So for example, let's say you want to do some courses around data and evidence. You'd click into that, you'd apply the filter. And there you have it. There'll be a range of courses from free ones to costed ones that you can look at to help you to identify which course might be most appropriate. So hopefully that is a bit of a useful tool. And the next thing I might do is, okay, I might jump back out of this. I'll stop sharing my screen for a second. Okay. Do you have any questions about the training directory or any reflections? Thanks, Kate. Kate, we can definitely add the URL at the end of it. We'll give you this link so that you have the resources and you can jump on it anytime. Awesome. So there is a compass tool that I will go into a little bit later, but right now I'm a bit excited because I'm now going to be talking to our guests. As Susan said earlier, we have 3 lovely guests, and I'm going to start with our first one. So I'd like to introduce you to Tchan, and she's our Workplace Initiatives Coordinator here at Place. Welcome, Steph. Lovely to see you.
Thanks, Suji. Lovely to see everyone here.
Now, Steph, you have worked at senior level as a director at TAFE for many years, and you have extensive experience when it comes to designing learning for workforce and capability development. So what I would like to ask you is, leaning into your background at TAFE and your recent work here at Place around workforce development, how do you think people can acquire place-based skills?
It's a good question, Suji, because if I put my vocational education training hat on, there's really a patchwork model of training available for the place-based sector. And largely that's because the training that's out there is not contextualized to the place-based workforce, and especially the skills that you just introduced, Suji, they're more generic sort of skills. And the other part of the equation is that within the vocational education training landscape, and indeed in the higher education system, there's actually no national coordinated training or pathway that names place-based work. And I think that naming is quite important. So what it means is that there's no formal training pathways available to workers or employers. So workers don't know what counts in terms of their learning pathways, and employers don't have the consistency in what do I look for when I'm employing staff. And that's a little bit like the history of the peer work qualification, which many of you would be familiar with. When peer workers started to become a recognised part of the workforce, particularly in the mental health sector, the roles began as voluntary work, not recognised. Time went on. The value was recognised, and there was a call for some recognition for particular skills for peer work, which we now have a national certificate for in peer work. And place-based workers maybe are in a similar position. So it's an interesting question for us all to consider is, do we want to see a national qualification for place-based skills from a systems perspective? What would the value be? And maybe there's some constraints that come with that. And of course, there's lots of other informal qualifications going on in the accredited and non-accredited space, and they vary according to the quality, the cost, the accessibility. The beauty of an accredited course is that it attracts subsidised funding for the training, so it brings the training into a more inclusive space. So that's the fragmented training landscape for place-based work, Suji.
Thank you, Steph. Yes, that's a really important point that you brought in there. From what is available, from the training that is available, what are some of the other issues that are facing people who want to access place-based skills, do you think, Steph?
I think there's a general lack of accessibility for people. And of course, in place-based work, we have locations across the country, regional, remote, very remote, outer urban. The digital access is patchy. Digital literacy and foundational skills for people to access the training generally assumes quite a high level of language literacy and numeracy and digital literacy. So that is a barrier for people to access. People with caring responsibilities, with low incomes, and in regional and remote are going to be most affected by that. And cost, of course, is an issue. The other thing is that people in place-based work often are working in isolation. So how do they find the time within their workplace to make to come offline and to be available to train and then potentially to bring it back into their community. So there's a squeeze there as well going on for us. And I think one of the other issues is that with the options that are available, there are some gaps within that. So there's a lot of work happening in project management, stakeholder engagement, but not so much in the co-design or the deep listening space. So again, there's gaps in access to some of those trainings.
Thank you, Steph. Yes, some very important points to bring in, because while there's a lot of training, inequities in access can be a barrier to accessing some of that training. Awesome. How do you think people can acquire some of the place-based skills that we are talking about?
I think they can acquire them potentially through engaging with some of our tools at Place, because the Compass tool is very helpful as a tool to reflect on what you know, what you don't know, and what you might like to do, which might help with some forward planning for people to think, oh, well, this is available. Maybe in next year's budget, we can somehow get this to happen. I think it's also anyone designing courses or programs should really be thinking about inclusivity and how is that going to work in the place-based sector. And perhaps I'd be interested to hear in the comments whether people are interested in pushing towards a formal qualification and what that might look like.
Thank you, Steph. You mentioned this Compass tool. I'm going to take a minute here to share that tool with the audience here. Just bear with me for a second.
Thanks, Suji.
Thank you, Steph. So if we go back into our initiatives and we go back into the workforce training here, we can access the Compass tool here. There's 2 points where you can access it, or you can also access it here. So let's go this way first. And this is the tool that you were talking about, Steph, am I right?
That's right, Suji.
Okay, so basically how this works is it's a self-rating tool. So what you can do is, if you go into leadership, for example, and you look at the statements there, you can rate yourself. So just to test it out, if you say often, that means you're quite competent. And you can say, if you say often here as well, it will say keep doing what you're doing and consider mentoring or peer support to help others build their skill. On the other hand, if you rate yourself as sometimes here, it will say explore strengthening relational leadership. So if you remember, this is one of the competencies we had before. And then when you click into relational leadership, it will take you back into the training directory, but it will take you to that filtered content where just relational leadership comes up. Thank you for bringing that in, Steph. That was really useful. Does anyone have any reflections on that, or any comments or questions on that? And I will stop sharing. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Steph. That was wonderful. And, I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and your expertise on this one.
A pleasure, Suji.
All right. Well, we are going to move on to our next guest, and that is Tess, who's the Director of Strategy and Governance. So Tess is going to bring a strategy and governance lens to the skills. Tess, welcome.
Thanks so much, Suji. It's an honor to be here.
Oh, thank you so much. Tess, now you work closely with our community council here at Place. Could you briefly explain the role of the community council and tell us how these skills and competencies show up in that space?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have 2 members of our community council, Christine and Patrick, online today. And our community council is just one of the ways Place makes sure that we've built community leadership into the way we think and we plan and we make decisions. And they've really shown me a different way of thinking about leadership. It's not necessarily about the corporate leadership that we might all understand, but it's about how you build trust with your communities and achieve legitimacy and accountability to your communities and bringing everyone along on the journey with you. And it was interesting that we talked about deep listening before, because the council has shown me that it's not just something that you do once in one place. It's something you do every day, in the coffee shop, at the school, on the street, constantly speaking to people and testing what's best and what direction the community is going in. And what we've learned from the community council is that everyone holds a piece of the puzzle. So it can't just be me looking at solutions. And our people who are really excellent at place-based skills are able to bring all of those pieces of the puzzle together in ways that benefit the community and bring together all of that knowledge, capability, relationships, and leadership that everyone has.
Thank you, Tess. That was beautiful. I love two things you said, and that is about how deep listening is something we use every day in our work. And the second thing is that piece of the puzzle, how we all each hold a piece, and no one is more important or less important, but everyone is a part of that puzzle. What a beautiful way to explain strategy. Thank you so much. And I will now move on to our final guest of the day, who is a place-based practitioner and also a member of our community council. And that is Christine Kamau, who is a community development worker at AC Care in South Australia. Now, Christine will probably wear mostly her practitioner hat in this conversation, but Christine, the field is open, and we are really grateful to you for stepping into this during your holidays and during your time off. I know you're currently based in Sydney, enjoying some time away from work. So welcome, Christine.
Hi, everyone. As Suji said, I'm a community development worker at AC Care in the Maryland region of South Australia. It's been an honor to learn from our First Nations people and also the community at large. And I bring my experiences and also what I've had from community. So I'm really grateful to be part of this conversation. It was spontaneous, but I feel it was meant to be.
Thank you so much, Christine. Now, we've talked about these 6 skills and competencies as we had just done now. And I just want to ask you, do any of these skills show up in your context? And if they do, how do they show up?
I feel like most of the skills do show up in my context. I personally don't believe that one person can hold all the skills. And that we all, as Tess said, bring a part of the puzzle and we complement each other. I feel that I could speak to co-design and relational, almost how some of the skills overlap, like co-design and leadership, relational leadership, adaptability. I feel that and how also that ties into deeply listening. And I find that there's great value in investing time in deeply hearing people and also synthesizing what you're hearing from different sources to have a perspective of community that is authentic and not what you feel should be, but rather what you're hearing, and your ability to adapt to different perspectives respectfully is something community values. People are observing to see if the suggestion is given, are you willing to consider it? Or if you're not, are you able to be honest about why? I also see these skills in our community partner organizations. I see these in other community development workers in our region, like local council, Department of Human Services, Public Health Network. And I see how people are able to bring aspects of themselves and their focus in these skills to the table, and then together we can work together. And also within AC Care, because I'm part of Communities for Children program, but there's other programs, and I see how people work together to solve problems and how that goes a long way in supporting community.
Thank you, Christine. That was a very comprehensive answer, and it was really interesting to see what you said about dropping your agenda and allowing to be shaped by community priorities, which is very much related to adaptive leadership as well. Beautiful. Now, in terms of deep listening, you also touched on that. You talked about bringing people together and being honest and transparent and building trust as you deliver, which relates a little bit to relational leadership. Now, what ways of building capability have you seen as a practitioner?
I think first off, it's formal training. So when there's formal training opportunities, people really value that in the sector in our region because they're not easy to come by. And especially really in-depth training, whether it's about trauma-informed practice or respectful relationships and understanding what's more current. Often you do training, but then it's hard to keep up with what the new version of the training you've done is. And there's always that sense of lack of accessibility and also digital accessibility. We do a lot of webinars, but then sometimes people don't even have access to that. And there's also a consideration of shame. People aren't always feel comfortable saying that I can't do this because I don't have internet, or it's hard to have a quiet space to focus. And it's more about proactively in the design of these programs and trainings, considering how you could give options. I found that also in my co-design work really helps, give different options. And if someone doesn't need that, it's fine. But if someone does, it's a huge lifesaver. The other thing, personally, with capacity building, I value transparency. If it's an area of growth that I have, I fully own that because I also believe a growth mindset is huge for place-based work. So if it's an area of growth, I appreciate that transparent conversation and then have exploring what those opportunities are. The best sort is self-driven. So the skills matrix is a good place to check yourself and reflect. Reflect back on what you can do better. But then if a training is being presented, there's always that inherent criticism about something needs to be improved. And that needs to come with transparency. And I appreciate that a lot of what you're doing is based on what you're hearing. So you're really responding to a need, not so much presenting something that you think is a good idea without checking. And I think the last thing I wanted to talk about was internally in our organization. I feel that people are really generous in sharing what they know. So it's all the informal conversations. I value those because I can have a quick conversation with someone who has knowledge about a specific thing, or whether it's finance or different areas, and I can slowly learn on the job, but also through informal conversations and internal opportunities to shadow or to have internal trainings designed even by people within organizations. And I think that there's probably a lot of potential in teaching place-based practitioners to design trainings, because there could be so much more potential in what actually gets delivered. So yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Christine. And I that resonated. Getting place-based practitioners to co-design the training could mean that the training is really tailored and very relevant to practitioners. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Last question. Have you found instances when you've tried to build capacity where you've hit a roadblock or had some issues?
I think that one of the things that could be hard is when you do build capacity, but then people move to different jobs, which happens, and you want to encourage that within community so that skills are shared. But sometimes it does mean that you need to train someone else, which is what happens. I think something else can be trying to find credible information and going through all the resources to find, like I mentioned, what's current. I think also, like I'd mentioned, accessibility, where you do provide a training, but sometimes I sit back and think there's probably people who couldn't make it because of transport. That's one of the issues in our region. And I consider that, I'm like, there's probably people who could benefit from this who couldn't make it here. And just constantly thinking about how can I be intentional about accessibility and just make it that as many people as can benefit are able to be present.
Thank you, Christine. That's beautiful. I really valued all the perspectives you brought in, and it's always interesting to hear from a practitioner and to feel that some of those skills and competencies that have been identified being validators as well. Now, I'd like to throw it back to the audience, and I'd like to ask if there are any questions or reflections for Christine. And yes, Tammy, barriers to participation are a massive challenge in the regions around transport. Yeah, that's a really strong point. Would anyone like to ask Christine any questions? Or any questions for any of our speakers, for either Tess, Steph, or Christine? Thank you, Taylor. Steph, that's a good point. Transparency could be the seventh skill, for sure.
Suji, it's Jane here, and I know you may not be able to see my hand. I'm just wondering if Christine can talk us a little bit more through that co-design of training. It sounds like an exciting approach, and I'm wondering if she's done it before and what her thoughts would be as to how we would go about that.
Thank you, Jane. Christine, over to you.
Yeah, so I have not co-designed training specifically. Over the last year, I've had the honor of learning from a co-design practitioner called Dana Shem. She's an Naranjeri person, and she's also well respected in the sector, very knowledgeable and a systems thinker. She's a role model for me what the process of co-design looks like in practice. And I feel like it could look like, for example, with this tool, the skills tool, I think best case is doing workshops and going back and forth, allowing enough time for back and forth, and then providing the first draft back to the sector, getting feedback, refining, second draft back, and just that iterative process of giving different models of the training. But specifically in a community, I imagine that if you work with a group of place-based practitioners and you share the skills of designing trainings, and then that could be an avenue for them to then create and co-design with community, or you do it together as part of the process of learning what that looks like for a community. So it's almost a co-create with in real time, and then that process can be borrowed from for future versions of different sorts of training. So I think that's, I'm trying to articulate that, but I think that's it. It's co-creating with place-based practitioners and tracking what that process looks like in a community. And then that can be a pathway or sort of a framework for that to be utilized by other, when place-based practitioners do the actual co-designing of different sorts of training. So just a thought.
That's great, Christine. Thanks very much. Jane, I hope, yes, so all right, great. Yes, I think Jane might be hitting you up for a conversation by the looks of it. She sounds very interested in that. And there is a question from Susan in the chat, and she says, I'd love to hear what strategies you've used, Christine, to address either the geographic challenge or digital access to get to training opportunities.
So one of the trainings we've provided has been Circle of Security to educators in the region. And we've spoken to one of our community members, and they said one of the barriers for educators is that most trainings are during the day when they are doing work. So we provided that in the evening from I think 7:30 to 8:30, and it's online. And there's been more people able to access that than it would have been if we had done it during the day, during normal work hours. So I'd say that's one example of how we've done it, but there's so much more I'm learning as I listen to community, specifically around transport. And I think one of the ideas could be when there's a training provided, also giving the option of transport available if needed. Please reach out to us, something like that, so that it's more proactive rather than someone having to say, I need help. And also, I think I was talking to someone who said that when something is free, there's always that sense of I'm not entitled to this. So calling to ask, oh, can I get transport is a bit counterintuitive. So providing that can mean that it's less of a, I guess, less embarrassing for some people.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Christine. I've taken up a lot of your time, and I really am, again, so grateful for your contribution and input. It has been immensely valuable. We might run one quick slide, or do we have time, or should we move on, team? What's the deal here?
I think we have time, Suji.
We have time? Okay, all right. Sam, could we do a Slido in terms of what strategies, from your perspective, work best to build place-based skills? We'd love to hear your thoughts on this one. Learning from mentors, that's a big one. We find peer learning always keeps coming up. Learning by doing, yes, especially in terms of place-based work. Wow, it's so interesting to see mentorship coming up so much. Kindness, very important as well. The relational work we do. Time to learn and apply is so critical. Because I guess if you train and you don't get that opportunity to actually put it into practice, it doesn't quite reinforce the knowledge in the way that it could if you had the option to use it straight away. Inclusivity. Yeah, that's a good one as well. Cultural appropriateness comes to mind when you talk about inclusivity. Building relationships and trust, valuing skills and experience in the community. Yes. Capability-led approaches. A lot of things that you mentioned, Christine, as well, are popping up here. So that's interesting to see. Transparency and so on. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I truly appreciate your engagement and interaction today. And I would like to hand over to my lovely colleague, Susan, to close our session out for the day. Over to you, Susan.
Thanks so much, Suji. Thanks, everyone. That was such a good conversation. So we're about to wrap up now in our last couple of minutes. If there are any final thoughts or questions bubbling up for you, drop it in the chat. Really keen to hear what this has brought up, what these discussions have brought up for you. We're also going to share a very short follow-up survey in the chat now. So you're welcome to fill that in as we wrap up. It takes about 5 to 7 minutes, but it really helps us to understand what's worked in this session for you, or if you had ideas around how we could shape future sessions. Really open to hearing that too. Now, we'll also drop in the skills compass and the training directory URLs into the chat if we haven't already. I think Chloe's dropped those in. We'll add them in at the end there. And we really encourage you to spend some time with these in your own context. They're great to support reflection, decision-making, conversation, whether it's in your team, in your organization, or in your community. And as always, we're really open to any feedback, any discussions that you want to have about these tools. And likewise, if you want to stay connected with us outside of this program, if you're interested in our impact networks, if you're interested in learning more about our work, or just having a conversation about place-based capability development, please do reach out to the team. And a great place to start with that is to just send us through an email that Chloe's popping in there, enable@Place Australia. Big thank you to our speakers today. Thank you, Suji, Steph, Tess, and Christine for sharing your amazing insights and experiences and for bringing this to life from different perspectives. And thank you also to our fantastic audience contributions. We will share the details of the next Place in Practice in July shortly, and we would love for you to join us there. Thanks again, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you next time.